This afternoon. Is it the final nail in the coffin for the SNP? We'll be speaking to key political figures north of the border, and I'll be reacting in my take at 10. Nicola Sturgeon is finding out the hard way that you reap what you sow, and her dream of independence is now dead. In my big opinion, painful though his departure was, it's time to move on from Boris Johnson. There's currently only one winner in this political soap opera, and it's Sir Keir Starmer. My verdict on this crazy civil war in the Tory party in just a moment.
To defend his Brexit legacy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to defend my Brexit legacy too. So would there be a possibility of a new coming together?
Those explosive headlines keep on coming. Should the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? Would you be voting for it? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, the fearless Anne Widdecombe. Lots to get through. Sturgeon, but first, Boris Johnson. After the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Thanks, Mark. Let's get you up to date with the headlines from the GB newsroom. As you've just been hearing, Nicola Sturgeon says she's innocent of any wrongdoing after being arrested and released without charge pending further inquiries. Scotland's former First Minister added her questioning by police investigating SNP finances was both a shock and deeply distressing. In April, her husband, Peter Murrell, who was the party's chief executive, and the ex-treasurer Colin Beattie were also questioned and released without charge. Her home and the SNP headquarters were also searched in April, with police seen removing boxes of evidence. The long-running inquiry is investigating what happened to around £600,000 worth of donations earmarked for the Scottish independence campaign. 8 teenagers have been arrested on suspicion of murder after a 16-year-old boy was stabbed to death in Bath yesterday. Avon and Somerset police say a 35-year-old woman was also injured but has since been discharged from hospital. The 6 boys and 2 girls are aged between 15 and 17 years old. 3 British tourists are missing after a dive boat burst into flames in the Red Sea off Egypt. Officials say 12 Britons were rescued along with 12 Egyptian crew and guides. It's believed the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit. The Foreign Office has confirmed it's in contact with Egyptian authorities and is assisting all of those involved. One of Boris Johnson's allies says the resignations of 2 Tory MPs was not a coordinated attempt to undermine the Prime Minister. Jacob Rees-Mogg insists there's no plot against Rishi Sunak and believes he should remain leader. He also believes, though, Mr Johnson could easily get back into Parliament at the next election. The former Prime Minister announced he was stepping down as an MP after being handed the findings of the Partygate inquiry. Sir Jacob, though, says there could be a split if some MPs try to block Johnson's return, but admits things could have been done better.
One always deserves blame for one's own mistakes. It would be absurd of me to pretend that Boris hasn't made mistakes. There was a man called Peter Wentworth who in the late 16th century was locked up in the Tower for saying in the House of Commons, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." The same could be said of Boris. None is without fault, no, not our gracious Boris. That is true of all of us.
And the Met Office has warned almost a month's worth of rain could fall over parts of the UK in the next 12 hours. However, the country will still be hotter than the south of France, with 31 degrees recorded at Heathrow earlier. Yellow thunderstorm alerts will be in force until 9 p.m. tomorrow. Look after yourself in the heat. TV, online, DAB and TuneIn Radio. This is GB News. Now back to Mark.
Phew, what a scorcher. That's not the weather, just the politics. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. We react to the bombshell news of former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's arrest earlier today. Is it the final nail in the coffin for the SNP? We'll be speaking to key political figures north of the border, and I'll be reacting in my take at 10. Nicola Sturgeon is finding out the hard way you reap what you sow, and her dream of independence is now dead. In my big opinion, painful though his departure was, it's time to move on from Boris Johnson. There's currently only one winner in this political soap opera, and it's Sir Keir Starmer. My Mark Meets guest is the top author of a brand new book about Boris Johnson and his time in number 10. Bojo was a highly consequential Prime Minister, but was he a good one? And should Boris Johnson join forces with Nigel Farage and start a new political party? Would you vote for it? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker. The fearless Anne Widdecombe joins us after 10. Mark Dolan tonight is the home of the papers with tomorrow's front pages from 10:30 sharp, with three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Tonight, Nina Mishkov, Adrian Hayes and Neil Hamilton. Tonight I'll be asking the pundits, why are we being told to fear the sun when we used to enjoy it? Is it unhealthy to treat dogs as if they were children? And are you sick of being asked for feedback by companies? Plus your emails, especially the spicy ones, mark@gbnews.com. This show has a golden rule, a strict rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. A big 2 hours to come. Sturgeon at 10, but first, this. Sometimes you get to that point in a relationship where you just think, they don't deserve me. The Conservative Party risk exactly that with the British people, following yet another absurd soap opera involving, you guessed it, Boris Johnson, a man who was put on this earth to make headlines. But it's all the wrong headlines. Right now, with the governing party in turmoil over an ex that they can't get over. But the bitter truth is it is the end of the affair. Divorce is pending, and it's time for both parties to split the CDs, arrange shared custody of the dog and move on. But the Boris Spartans on those green backbenches didn't get the memo. What is the price they pay for their undying loyalty? A majority Labour government. Surely a threat that should unite all Blues. It was the Blues of Man City last night who came together to achieve footballing victory. But it seems the other Blues, the warring Tories, seek no trophy at all, just a dust-up in the dressing room. It's like they want to be out of the competition. The public will not take kindly to this growing farce as they struggle to put food on the table, get a GP appointment, pay their rent or mortgage, or fill the car with petrol. Nadine Dorries, Boris Johnson's wannabe girlfriend, is an example of someone more keen to settle scores than to score for her own party. In the end, they're all scoring an own goal. There's a growing sense now that the Tories don't deserve power, and most worryingly for their supporters, that they don't want it either, presumably punch-drunk from the pandemic, the economic turmoil and the behind-the-scenes political drama. But like in a football match, it ain't over till the final whistle. And although the Conservatives' maverick striker has walked off the pitch, it's my unfashionable view that they have an excellent captain in Rishi Sunak, someone who knows how to defend and attack. The Tories are now a tainted brand, toxic even, but that doesn't make the alternative any better. There's no option on the voting slip for not the Tories. It's likely they will be dispatched from office in a year's time, and many would argue rightly so. But be careful what you wish for. Out of the frying pan into the fire, with a Labour government that will be under pressure from supporters to fulfil the union's inflation-busting demands. They'll be under pressure to invest in every single government department. And remember, the term invest is just a snake oil word for more borrowed billions. They'll be under pressure from progressives in Islington, North London, to fold to the woke mob, with more stifling political correctness, which is infecting our public institutions and making life miserable for everyone. But no one is going to vote for a party that doesn't seem to want to be in power. That's like doing a tango with someone that doesn't want to dance. And to be fair to Labour, they look like they want power. They're hungry. They're out there selling their message. And I'm going to give Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, due credit for cancelling her plan to spaff £28 billion a year on a so-called green prosperity plan, because she's realised, and probably been told by bigwigs in the city, that it's just not affordable. Fair play. Yes, it's a U-turn, but the message is clear. Labour are getting serious about government. As I said last night, since the removal of Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party has returned to some form of sanity, making the prospect of Prime Minister Starmer hardly palatable, but not terrifying either, which means it's all to play for. I personally think in our increasingly presidential system, if it's a choice between Sunak and Starmer, I think Sunak edges it as the superior CEO. Yes, he's richer than Switzerland and a more awkward public speaker than the Elephant Man, but he doesn't flip-flop like Starmer, and he knows what a woman is. And I would argue he has steadied the ship significantly since he arrived at number 10, identifying the 5 key issues facing the country: the NHS, illegal migrant crossings, economic growth, the debt and inflation. So those warring Tories must at last decide whose team they are on. Team Boris, which isn't even on the pitch, or Team Sunak, who currently has the ball and the balls. Boris got Brexit done. He kept Corbyn out of number 10, and he rightly sold a positive vision of Britain. But whether or not his dispatch from Parliament was politically motivated or not, whether it was fair or a miscarriage of justice, who the hell knows? It's actually irrelevant. His name has gone in the referee's book, and he's walking down into the tunnel. So it's time to move on from Boris Johnson, whose time has come and gone. He's old news. He's out of the squad, he's off the pitch, and he's taken an early bath. Starmer versus Sunak is match of the day. Brilliant stuff. Now, your reaction. Labour would argue that the Tories have made such a mess of the country, of our public services, of the economy, that it's time for change. What's your view? Mark at GBNews.com. Reacting to my big opinion, my top pundits: journalist and broadcaster Nina Mishkov, adventurer and leadership coach Adrian. Where's Nina? Please can I get a camera on Nina Mishkov, because we've got to see that very fine figure of a lady. There she is, resplendent in red. Adventurer and leadership coach Adrian Hayes, and the leader of UKIP and former Tory MP Neil Hamilton. Well, Adrian Hayes, it's time for the Tories to move on from Boris Johnson. It's the end of the affair.
You're right. And I'm going to elevate it to a subject I'm a specialist in, which is leadership. But leaders promise a better future. And like him or loathe them, that's what Boris did. And with his charisma, his oratory skills, his positivity, his vision. So he was a leader, and that's why he's got this following. But I hope the downfall, what's going on right now with Sturgeon, with Johnson and Trump, is people start to realise that charisma and oratory skills isn't just what we need. We need courage, conviction, competence, honesty and integrity, and above all, sound judgment. I'm afraid on the sound judgment, Boris has failed too many times for my liking.
Nina, it's time for the Tories to move on. It's time for a divorce, share the CDs, arrange joint custody of the dog and get out.
Do you know, I laughed and laughed and laughed when I heard the news. I was so thrilled. It was hilarious. Also, partially because the way Boris has reacted to the news that the Privileges Committee were going to suspend him for longer than the 10 days, he got early warning of that. The way he reacted to that just proved what the lack of leadership and the fact that he's such a narcissistic buffoon that he cares nothing for anybody else, because he walked away. What a coward. He could have fought that in the House of Commons. He could have fought an election to see if people still wanted him. But no, you know, all liars are cowards.
However, this is a guy that had a mandate to run the country for 5 years, 80-seat majority. They didn't vote for Rishi Sunak. They voted for Boris Johnson. He got Brexit done. He led Europe out of COVID measures, and he supported Ukraine.
He got into power and had a huge 80 majority. not just because of Boris, not just because of Brexit, but because people were terrified of Jeremy Corbyn. So a large portion of that vote was against Jeremy Corbyn. Let's not forget that. That's all been forgotten. And Brexit has been the biggest disaster that this country has inflicted on itself. So,
where's the evidence that Brexit is a disaster?
You ask any person, are they better off? Can they get an appointment? Can they...
Well, Nina, let's have a look at
UKIP,
let's have a look at the Eurozone. The Eurozone is currently in recession. Germany is in recession. The UK has avoided recession.
You can call it recession, you can call it banana milkshake. The financial situation is such that everybody is living from one paycheck to the next. We're
having a hard time. We borrowed $500 billion to pay for the pandemic.
The Tories crashed the economy. Liz Truss was an absolute disaster. Look at young people with mortgages. Look what's happening with mortgages. Look at interest rates.
Interest rates are sky high in America. Did they have Brexit?
No, but
Did they have Liz Truss?
That's not the only thing. Their mortgages are absolutely just crucifying people. There is, this country is absolutely broken, and it's 13 years of Tory rule with these clowns at the end, Boris and Liz Truss. My God, they've destroyed us.
Neil Hamilton, I know many of my viewers and listeners will not be happy with this Boris bashing. What's your view?
Well, Boris is a ringmaster in the carnival of chaos, isn't he? As I've said many times, that he's a bull that carries his own china shop around with him, and everything he does is accompanied by the sound of broken glass and smashing crockery. The big
sounds like life at the Hamiltons.
Well, no, we don't have broken crockery because when Christine throws it at me, I catch it and I put it carefully back where it belongs, and then we carry on. But I mean, the real problem with Boris is that fundamentally he's just a campaigner, a talented campaigner. He's an entertainer and an entertaining person. But when you ask, really, what is Boris about? What does he believe on the big issues of the day? On, for example, immigration. Well, as far as I know, Boris is in favour of the mass immigration that we've endured for the last 13 years, which have added 7 million people to our population in the last 20 years. He's doubled down on all the green nonsense, which has added 25% to everybody's electricity and gas bills, regardless of the problems arising out of Ukraine and the Russians cutting off the gas to Europe and so on. The green taxes that people are having to pay, causing real problems for people on low incomes. On so many other issues, Boris has not been a real Conservative. So when you ask, is it time to move on from Boris? I say it's time to move on both from Boris and from Sunak.
OK. Well, of course, Neil would say that. He's the leader of UKIP. But what do you think about that? Is it time to move on from Boris Johnson? Do you think there's a way back to high office for him? Would you support a party led by Boris Johnson and supported by none other than Nigel Farage? We'll debate that later. But coming up next in the big story is Nicola Sturgeon's arrest, the final nail in the coffin for the SNP. That's next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, some strong reactions to my big opinion. Is it time to move on from Boris Johnson? Alan says Mark Bojo and his sycophants and the whole of the successive Conservative governments have made a total hash of governing this country. Mind you, they aren't even suited to running a small banana republic. They are the mirror of Midas. Whatever they whatever they touch turns to SHIT. The sooner they vacate the field, the better. Good riddance. Graham says, Mark, I believe you totally misled the points of the Select Committee and the Boris resignation. This is not about moving on from Boris. It's about a Remainer left-wing establishment coup to overturn Brexit that almost 18 million people voted for twice. In other words, the voters against the blob establishment. Richard, I disagree with you, says Richard. Mark, I disagree. Boris and Nigel must join forces to stop Labour. Douglas, hi Mark. Boris, the man who conned the British people into voting for Brexit, which is and was going to be a total disaster. He's only good at lying and breeding. Good riddance, says Doug in Southport. And last but not least, Sandra with a spicy one. Hi Mark, please get that awful woman off the couch before I break my TV. I think she's referring to my top pundit, Nina Mishkov. She's going to blame everything on Boris and everything on Brexit. When are you going to have some sensible people on the couch who can actually debate something without trying to destroy Boris or Brexit? Strong opinions, keep them coming. Mark at gbnews.com. It's time for the big story. And Nicola Sturgeon has been arrested and questioned by detectives investigating allegations of financial misconduct by the Scottish National Party. Sturgeon, who quit as Scotland's First Minister and SNP leader in March, is the third person to be arrested as part of Operation Branchform, the Police Scotland investigation into allegations that the party misspent more than £600,000 in donations for an independence campaign. The force has said that Police Scotland detectives were interviewing Sturgeon as a suspect. Now, the former First Minister protests her innocence and says she's confident she's done nothing wrong. But what are the implications for Sturgeon, her legacy, the future of the SNP and the cause of independence? To discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome former political correspondent for the Press and Journal, Andrew Liddell, ex-MSP and former leader of Reform UK Scotland, Michelle Ballantyne. We've also got the leader of the Alba Party in the House of Commons, an MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath, Neil Hanvey, and Katrine Bussey, the political editor at Press Association Scotland. Let me start with you, Katrine, if I can. Did anyone see this arrest coming?
Of course we've seen this coming. This has been something that we've known really is going to happen since the very moment that Police Scotland arrested Peter Morrell, Nicola Sturgeon's husband. They've arrested him. They arrested Colin Beattie, who was at the time the SNP treasurer. It should be stressed that both those men have been released without charge, as has Nicola Sturgeon. So, yes, there will undoubtedly be a lot of questions for the SNP and for Humza Yousaf over the coming days and weeks over this. But as such, we still don't know what exactly has happened within the SNP.
Neil Hanvey, you are the leader of the Labour Party in the House of Commons. You want independence. Do you think that dream is now over because of this scandal?
Oh, absolutely not, no. But I do think that there is a very real and pressing need for the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, to create some distance between himself and Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell. This has been a very regrettable episode, and without getting into any of the details, which of course we're prohibited from discussing, there is a real need to decouple the SNP, its leadership, from the direction of the independence movement. That's something my party have been calling for quite some time. But there is now a very real need for that to happen. We now have the reverse of the situation that existed prior to the last independence referendum, where support for the SNP under Alex Salmond was somewhere around 50% and support for independence in the 30s. And we now have support for independence over 50%, 53 in the last opinion poll, certainly, and support for the SNP apparently in freefall. And I certainly don't think the events of today will help the SNP in any way. And that's not even before we begin to discuss some of the very serious problems that they're facing in government in Scotland, particularly as the partners in the Butte House Agreement, the Green Party, continue to drag them off in preposterous directions under policies that are ill thought out and even worse in their implementation.
Let's now get the views of the former MSP and ex-leader of Reform UK Scotland, Michelle Ballantyne. Michelle, what do you think this means for the future of the SNP?
Well, obviously, a lot will depend on where the investigation eventually goes. But it should be noted that although they've been released without charge, it is pending investigation continuing. And as such, I was really surprised to hear Nicola Sturgeon, putting out press releases, claiming her innocence, etc. Because at this time, she should really just be saying no comment, I think, and keeping her views quietly to herself, because she is under the Contempt of Parliament Act still at this point, as are we all, which is why we can't discuss the details. But in terms of where the SNP are going to go, I think what Neil said is absolutely correct. I mean, Humza Yousaf is facing a real choice now. Does he stand by Nicola Sturgeon no matter what happens, which he's done up until now? And he claims he has a very close relationship. She and her husband were his guiding mentors. Now, that might be something he wants to lose fairly quickly if he has any intention of being a successful leader. I disagree with Neil. I don't think independence is riding quite as high as Neil would like to believe. And I think a lot of people are fairly disillusioned. And what we may see going forward is the shift to Labour, because the SNP were the new version of Labour, if you like, in Scotland. But a lot of voters may well go back and vote Labour. And if the SNP really wanted to get the Conservatives out of government, it's the only way to do it. So I think the SNP could see a loss of votes and a surge towards Labour as people think, well, we've had enough of this, we've had enough of the mess here, and we want to change, because their habits in government, as Neil said, are not good. They don't have much to their credit in terms of a government.
Neil, I'll come back to you in a moment, but Andrew Liddle, you are Edinburgh-based. How is the news being received in Scotland?
Well, I think, as Katrine said, this was kind of expected. So it's not a kind of a huge revelation, but nevertheless, I think there is a sense of shock and indeed, I think, a sort of reckoning among people in Scotland. This is the second former First Minister now who's been arrested. Obviously, the other one being Alex Salmond previously. And I think this is a real issue for Scotland. And there's a sense that politics perhaps isn't better here necessarily than some in the SNP or indeed in the Scottish political establishment more generally would like to think. A lot of people will look at Westminster, what's happened with Partygate and these kind of things, and will like to present Holyrood and the Edinburgh kind of establishment as being more serious and not susceptible to those kind of issues. And I think these, the investigation that we're experiencing at the moment and the arrest of the former First Minister suggests that such a view is misplaced.
Yes, now, Neil Hanvey, don't you think you're a little optimistic that independence is still a goer, given the fact that the SNP, a very tainted brand, are the face of the whole project?
Well, and that's exactly the point that I'm making, Mark, which is that we decouple the independence movement.
How can you?
Well, it's quite straightforward. The independence movement established itself in a winter of a summer of optimism, in 2014, and the SNP.
It's always winter in Edinburgh.
They were given the opportunity to be the standard bearers of that movement. That they haven't managed to, under Nicola Sturgeon, move the dial in 8 years is no reflection on the appetite for independence in the wider movement. And that's why we want to see a proper constitutional convention of all parties and none where people are represented under a single ticket of Scotland United for Independence. That's what we will be continuing to push for. Not only is there an appetite for it, but there is continuing energy for it. We still have yes shops, as they're commonly known, up and down the country where campaigners are determined to see the constitutional change that Scotland requires for it to see its potential economically and socially.
Michelle,
there's no let up in this at all.
Michelle Ballantyne shaking her head there. Neil, by the way, quickly, because the clock's against us, your leader is Alex Salmond. He must be terribly saddened by what's happened to Nicola Sturgeon today.
Well,
is he crying into his soup? Is he drowning his sorrows in an Edinburgh pub right now, or Glasgow?
This is a very serious matter. And we shouldn't really make light of it. It is incredibly serious. And what I would say is, my reading of the situation is that Alec will be incredibly sad because he spent a huge proportion of his life building the SNP into the machine that he then handed over to Nicola Sturgeon. And for Nicola Sturgeon's time to end in this way is very sad indeed for all
right, well, fair enough. Listen, I know Alex Salmond very well. He's a gentleman, a very talented guy, and I'm pretty sure he's having a very large scotch tonight, and we'll just leave that there. By the way, I'm allowed to do that gag about the weather in Edinburgh because I lived there very happily for 4 years. What a city, and it is always winter. Last but not least, if I can please come back to Katrine Bussey from the Press Association Scotland. Katrine, what about the political map of Scotland at the next election? Is it Labour's for the taking?
I think it's really interesting. We're still probably 18 months out from an election. Labour are almost certain to make gains in that, and the SNP will make losses. It's really just a case of how big those gains will be for Labour and how badly the SNP will do.
OK, folks, thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but my deep thanks to Andrew Liddle, Michelle Ballantyne, Neil Hanvey and Katrine Bussey. A fascinating debate. What do you think? Is the hope of many Scots to have independence now dead in the water? Mark at gbnews.uk. I've been asking you in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll, is Nicola Sturgeon's arrest the final nail in the coffin for the SNP? We will reveal the results of that very shortly. Plus, with the pundits, why are we being told to fear the sun when we used to enjoy it? Is it unhealthy to treat dogs as if they were children? And are you sick of being asked for feedback by companies? All of that is next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Now, let me tell you, in just 20 minutes' time, I will be dealing with Nicola Sturgeon. My first official reaction to her arrest earlier today in my Take at 10. I'm not pulling my punches. You won't want to miss it. But reacting to the big stories of the day, we have journalist and broadcaster Nina Mishkov, adventurer and leadership coach Adrian Hayes, and the leader of UKIP, that's right, leader of a national party of this country, former Tory MP Neil Hamilton. Now, during the day, we conducted an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll, and we have the results that will bring it to you very, very shortly. But first, British summertime is upon us. Surely that means relaxing in parks, gardens, or even a trip to the seaside. Instead, all we're getting is extreme health warnings on how to cope with lovely, unremarkable 30-degree heat. We used to love the sun. Why are we being told that we've got to be afraid of it? What's that all about? Nina Mishkov, are you a sun lover?
I adore the sun. I was brought up in South Africa. I look for the sun. I go out into the sun.
You used to work for the sun?
I did, in fact. Good. Yes, that's many, many years ago. But in fact, good fun.
Were you?
Oh, Neil, there's one of those sort of remarks I could actually... Christine would smack you for it.
She would, actually. There's actually crockery flying around.
I will sit in for Christine and do her duty for her. I adore the sun, but there are people who should not be out in the sun, just Russia. I adore 30 degrees. That's fine for me.
And it's not extreme weather, is it, Nina?
Well, it is extreme weather. We haven't had 30 degrees for 10 months since last August. So it's not something that we Brits are accustomed to.
But it wasn't extreme 20 years ago, and now it is.
It is extreme. The thing is, what happens is that you get teenage boys running and jumping into cold lakes, and then somebody dies because, that sudden shock syndrome. You get old people going out who are unfit, overweight, have pulmonary conditions, and they don't think about that. So there are people who do need warnings. We're hopefully intelligent, educated people, and we know what risks we
well,
can.
No, there is, Neil. You need to take
absolutely.
account.
I was being kind, but there are people who don't know, and for that reason, there should be warnings.
I'm not sure about this. I mean, you are a survivor and an adventurer. We've gone very soft, haven't we?
We need a heat warning in the studio, let alone outside.
It is a little toasty here tonight.
I'm about to internally combust, Mark.
You're sweating. Nina's glowing.
I'm fine. I'm not even glowing.
Can I just say that Neil Hamilton is like Prince Andrew, doesn't sweat at all.
That, I think, is the only thing that I'm like Prince
Yes,
Andrew.
but have you been to Pizza Express and Woking? I mean, we have to be, we need to know the answers on this one.
So, there's two issues on this. One is the dreaded nanny state trying to tell us what we need to do. I think today we're well responsible enough to know if it's hot, to put a hat on, or not to jump at all these things.
Some people are stupid.
However, there's another side. So I think it's all this nanny state stuff. But the other thing is the nudge on the whole climate change, climate emergency, sorry, I could say. And it's all trying to get us used to this. We're in these heat problems. And I'm going to say it because I always like to speak. I speak about this a lot. I am really hoping that we get a splinter movement, environmentalists against net zero, because we've got to get sanity back to this really ridiculous debate.
Well, briefly, before we get to our next story, what did you think of those poor soldiers collapsing in the heat on Horse Guards Parade yesterday?
Unfortunately, soldiers have always collapsed in heat, and there's nothing new about that.
There were three of them, though, weren't there? Not just, it's always one.
Sky News, our arch rival, who I'm pleased to say we're normally beating about now, had a special climate change correspondent commenting on these the heat exhaustion.
And that's what I mean. It's this whole climate narrative that's being pushed on every shape, form and agenda.
OK, well, look, let me be crystal clear that the majority of scientists are certain that the planet is heating up and we've got to get those carbon emissions down.
It is.
Neil doesn't agree.
Not true.
Nina does. Of course, this show's all about opinions.
No way of knowing, however, the majority of scientists are in favour of anything.
Well, of course, that's the thing.
There is every way.
This issue will always spark the climate change debate, and it's one that we will always have on this show. And there are no subjects that are off limits. But let's get to this one now, because if you're out and about and hear perfectly normal adults talking about what's going on with their children, most of us don't bat an eyelid. But what goes through your mind when you realise these seemingly well-adjusted humans are talking about their dogs? Yet little Jimmy isn't their son. At primary school, it's a dachshund. Our obsession with dogs has reached a point where many people proclaim they love their four-legged friends with the same devotion they would a child. Has this gone too far? Neil?
Well, maybe some children are transitioning to dogs, are they? I don't know. Perhaps that's the explanation.
You've got to respect their pronouns.
Exactly. But, no, I mean, this is real nonsense, isn't it? Of course, there are lots of people who pour all their love into their pets. Christine does that to me. But
you're not trained, are you?
Certainly not house-trained.
But, I mean, dogs, in many ways, are rather pathetic creatures, aren't they? Because they're so dependent on their human masters. Very different from cats. You know, I'm a cat person because dogs have masters, with cats have staff. And so it's a very different kind of attitude to life. But, I mean, it is absurd. And we have a very good friend whose partner is totally devoted to her chihuahuas. And they've got their own wardrobes.
Right.
With ballet costumes and all sorts of dress. She must have spent an absolute fortune on these things, which we've always regarded, of course, as totally preposterous, but have been too afraid to mention it. But far be it from me to criticise people for their sort of displacement theory of love. Animals are a great source of comfort to a great many people, and this is certainly true. And I don't think it's up to us to criticise people.
I'm just getting over the chihuahuas in the ballet costume. Rudolph Nurewolf. There you go.
Very good. I agree with Neil in many ways, but I mean, the thing is, I have noticed since the pandemic that this whole kind of love affair with dogs has just increased and increased and increased, and people have become so dependent on their dogs and treat them.
Is that a bad thing, or is it okay?
I think we can go too far, because you forget that they're animals, and animals can turn, they can be vicious, but you can also... I mean, I understand if somebody lives alone and it's a much more companionable thing, or they have support dogs or anything like that. But I find that people are just going over the top. And I'm a cat. I'm like Neil. I'm a cat person. I really am. And people say, what if aliens came down and ruled our world? And I say, well, actually, they do. They're called cats. They rule all of us.
There you go. Well, that's a very, very good point, isn't it? I mean, our cat Harry, he does not live the dream, let me tell you. We were away last year for a week, and we had one of those machines that distributes the food, and it broke after about a day. He had to find dinner somewhere else. I think we got some very generous neighbours. Now, last but not least, if you make the grave mistake of reaching out to any customer service department, chances are you'll get a jolly email seconds later asking you to rate your experience. But it doesn't stop there. From constructive criticism at job interviews to asking why someone on a dating app has stopped talking to you, our need for feedback feels like something out of Black Mirror. So why are we obsessed with asking strangers for their thoughts? What do you think, Adrian?
Actually, being
Can
in
you
the
give us some feedback?
Yeah, feedback. Very well presented, Mark.
Bless you.
As someone in the coaching business, it's incredible that feedback is something we don't know how to do. The number one reason people leave companies is lack of appreciation. Believe it. It's not salary, it's nothing else, it's lack of appreciation. So if we don't know how to tell people that, great job, Mark, well presented, great voice, how do we do with the things that we want people to be a little bit better? We don't know how to do it. So I'm all for it, but it does annoy me the companies coming up with this, especially the phones. If you want to do a survey at the end of this phone call, please come. Just leave me,
Yeah.
Speed is...
I mean, look, even if it was bad, I give them 5 stars because I know it's somebody on a call centre having a tough and long day, probably been shouted at by angry members of the public. Earlier today, in an exclusive Mark Dolan Tonight People's poll, I've been asking, is Nicola Sturgeon's arrest the final nail in the coffin for the SNP? Well, the results are in. 82% say yes, and just 18% said no. I will be dealing with Nicola Sturgeon in my Take at 10. My first public comments, you won't want to miss it. I am not pulling my punches, and I'm not pulling her sporran either. Coming up next, my Mark Meets guest is the top author of a brand new book about, guess who? Boris Johnson. That's next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
In just 10 minutes' time, I will be dealing with Nicola Sturgeon in my Take at 10, but it's time now for Mark Meets. And who better to meet tonight than the co-author of a best-selling new book about, yes, you guessed it, Boris Johnson. Sir Anthony Seldon and my guest tonight, Raymond Newell, have written Johnson at Number 10, a warts and all account of the blonde bombshell's time at Number 10. A book as compelling, entertaining and jaw-dropping as Boris's short stint in office. And Raymond Newell joins me now. Raymond, Boris Johnson was a consequential Prime Minister, but was he a good one?
Yes, consequential in the sense that people are going to have to be dealing with the consequences of him for quite a long time. He was certainly a larger-than-life figure, and really this weekend has been a kind of fitting way to see the end of the political career of one of the most chaotic prime ministers this country has ever seen. It's an absolute amazing circumstance in that it is jaw-dropping that he could conduct himself in such a way within 10 Downing Street.
Now, you say that, but I mean, your book reads very well, but isn't it rather a stitch-up, given the fact that this is a guy who ended the Brexit deadlock? He got a free trade agreement with the EU, which no one said would be possible. He had the successful vaccine rollout. He showed leadership in Ukraine, and he kept Jeremy Corbyn out of Number 10. That's not a bad innings.
He did end the Brexit deadlock, but of course his successor, Sunak, is still having to deal with some of the consequences of that, and it's being revised at the moment with the Windsor framework. And I think in further years there will be more changes to that. His success as a campaigner, which is really the one thing he points towards as to why his time at the top isn't over, isn't really his success. 2019 was a great accomplishment for the Conservative Party, of course. But the two primary attributes that led to that victory were Jeremy Corbyn and were Brexit and wanting to see that finished. The vaccine campaign, of course, very successful for the nation and saved countless lives, but fundamentally was not the product of his decisions in government, but some fantastic work of our scientists and of other political officials within Number 10, within the wider political system, who did very, very well to deliver that. Ukraine is, I think, where he gets the most credit. But when you look back at the mess that was the first year of the pandemic, really, through to December 2020, where he made countless wrong decisions within 10 Downing Street, where he couldn't chair meetings, where he couldn't read the data, where he struggled for any consistency, and he left officials running about trying to figure out what decision had he made next and how had he changed his mind since lunchtime. Overall, it's a very bleak premiership.
Does Boris Johnson have a political ideology, Raymond? What does he stand for, do you think?
I think he's very unique amongst prime ministers in that he doesn't have a core ideology in the same way that, say, Truss has her economic beliefs. Sunak has his as well. Theresa May had her concept of conservatism. Johnson's beliefs have varied greatly throughout the years. I'd say the one thing that is consistent there is an instinct. He does have an instinct towards the more libertarian sense of things, of not being liked to be told what to do, which is very consistent in his private as well as his political life.
Plenty of my viewers and listeners would love to see Boris back in Number 10. Could he and would he do the job differently if he had another chance?
I think what we've seen over the last year since he left Number 10 is that he hasn't really learned from his mistakes. He hasn't learned how to be more consistent in his decision making. He hasn't learned that he needs to be less scandalous in his activities. And what he's learned is to blame others and continue to blame others for mistakes he's made in his handling of Partygate, his handling of Pincher, his handling of Patterson.
Raymond, what do you think is next for Boris Johnson, based upon the fact that you spent a lot of time exhaustively researching this man? What do you think he will do? Do you think he's plotting a political comeback?
Yeah, he craves the limelight in a way which compels him to try and be the most influential, the loudest, the most seen man in any room at any time. And I think that phenomenon is definitely going to continue. He's going to continue to threaten a comeback, to try and be a thorn in Sunak's side, to be a thorn in the government side. But he'll do it whilst making quite a lot of money, doing speeches, going abroad, doing all the things that the post-premiership life can bring to you. But yes, he'll continue to try, but I think he won't succeed in getting back to the top job.
Raymond, congratulations on the publication of the book. I've started it. It's a cracking read. Let me tell you that it's out now. It is co-authored by Raymond Newell and Anthony Seldon, Sir Anthony Seldon, no less, and it's called Johnson at 10, The Inside Story. Raymond, thank you so much for joining us at the 11th hour. Great to have you on the show. Your reaction to that interview, mark at gbnews.uk. Boris Johnson was a consequential Prime Minister, but was he a good one? What's your verdict? What's your report card? Mark at gbnews.com. The emails are coming in thick and fast. So how about this from Terry? Mark, is this a deja vu? Didn't you have this guy on recently criticising Boris Johnson? Some of you not happy with a perceived Boris bashing that we've seen in that chat. Listen, more of that to come. But next up, I will be making my first public comment. Stunning arrest of Nicola Sturgeon, former First Minister. She's finding out the hard way that you reap what you sow, and her dream of independence is dead. That's my take at 10. I'm not pulling my punches. That's next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on television, on radio, online, across the United Kingdom and the world. This is Mark Dolan Tonight. I'll be reacting in my take at 10 to the massive story today, the bombshell news that Nicola Sturgeon has been arrested and questioned by police. She's finding out the hard way you reap what you sow, and her dream of independence is now dead.
To defend his Brexit legacy.
Yeah.
Well, I want to defend my Brexit legacy too. So would there be a possibility of a new coming together?
What a story. Should the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? I'll be asking tonight's Newsmaker, the fearless Anne Widdecombe. And Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages at exactly 10:30 sharp. So a very busy hour to come. I will be dealing with Nicola Sturgeon in 2 minutes' time. I'm not pulling my punches. I'm not pulling her sporran. First, the headlines with Aaron Armstrong.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Nicola Sturgeon says she's certain she's committed no offence after being arrested as part of an ongoing inquiry into SNP finances. Scotland's former First Minister was questioned for around 7 hours earlier before being released, which she's described as a shock and deeply distressing. Ms Sturgeon is the third high-profile SNP member to be arrested as police investigate the whereabouts of £600,000 worth of donations intended for the independence campaign. In April, her husband, the party's former chief executive, in addition to Colin Beattie, the SNP's ex-treasurer, were also questioned and released without charge, with the couple's home and party headquarters searched by police. 11 teenagers have now been arrested on suspicion of murder after a 16-year-old boy was stabbed to death in Bath yesterday. 3 further arrests were made today, in addition to 8 yesterday. The 9 boys and 2 girls are aged between 15 and 17. A 35-year-old woman who was also injured has been discharged from hospital. Detectives in Northern Ireland have launched a murder inquiry in relation to a missing 21-year-old woman after suspected human remains have been found. Chloe Mitchell was last seen in Ballymena last Saturday. 2 men have been arrested and remain in custody in connection to the disappearance. 3 British tourists are missing after a dive boat burst into flames in the Red Sea off Egypt. Well, officials say 12 Britons were rescued, along with 12 Egyptian crew and guides. It's believed the fire was caused by an electrical short circuit. The Foreign Office has confirmed it's in contact with Egyptian authorities and is assisting those involved. Jacob Rees-Mogg has denied the recent resignations from Parliament of Boris Johnson's allies are part of a plot to depose the Prime Minister. The former Cabinet Minister says there's no coordinated attempt to undermine him and Rishi Sunak should remain as leader. But he's also backed Boris Johnson to return to number 10 after the next general election. Mr Johnson announced he was stepping down as an MP after being handed the findings of the Partygate inquiry over whether he misled Parliament. And Sir Jacob admits his ally acted improperly.
One always deserves blame for one's own mistakes. It would be absurd of me to pretend that Boris hasn't made mistakes. There was a man called Peter Wentworth who in the late 16th century was locked up in the Tower for saying in the House of Commons, "None is without fault, no, not our gracious Queen." The same could be said of Boris. None is without fault, no, not our gracious Boris. That is true of all of us.
And we'll have more on some of those stories coming up now with Mark.
Thanks, Aaron. Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. Should Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? I'll be asking tonight's newsmaker, the fearless Anne Widdecombe. Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of the papers, with tomorrow's front pages from exactly 10:30 sharp, with three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. A big hour to come. Let's start with this. How the mighty have fallen. Pint-sized dictator, the tartan Trump, Nicola Sturgeon's career ends in disgrace, arrested by police over financial irregularities in the SNP. Irregularities that raise more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. These shocking scenes north of the border, following the ignominious arrest of her own husband and former party chief Peter Murrell. She was the leader of the party. He was the CEO. The SNP is such a cosy little family, but more like the Addams family or the Wests. This humiliating development is a nail in the coffin for Sturgeon's already tattered reputation. It's a nail in the coffin for the autocratic and ideological SNP. And it's a nail in the coffin for the utterly deranged idea of Scottish independence. Hiding in plain sight, the SNP, coked up on control and ripped to the tits on unchecked power, revealed the great dangers of a one-party state. This latest financial scandal can be added to the SNP's many crimes whilst in office, presiding over disastrous health outcomes, plummeting attainment standards in Scotland's schools, a near-bankrupt Scottish NHS, the phasing out of North Sea oil and gas, and the rolling out of divisive, toxic, woke ideology. Scotland being one of the most woke countries in the world, all thanks to Sturgeon. Free speech long ago disappeared in Scotland thanks to current First Minister Humza Yousaf, with anything that the SNP didn't like or agree with labelled a hate crime. At one point, Yousaf flirted with legislation that would see you arrested for inappropriate comments that you make in your own home, a level of intrusion that would have Kim Jong-un or Chairman Mao blushing. As First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon ignored the important domestic issues facing the people of Scotland in pursuit of independence. Every single measure, every single policy has been focused not on the national interest of the great country of Scotland, but the deranged dogma of separatism. Even the pandemic response, when lives were at stake, was leveraged by Sturgeon to embarrass her counterpart Boris Johnson in Westminster. It's a cruel irony for Sturgeon that it was the SNP's preoccupation, its obsession with trans ideology, which says a man is a woman and a woman is a man, that ultimately did for her, especially when news broke that a double rapist, that's right, a double rapist who calls himself Isla Bryson, was accommodated in a women's prison. The gender self-ID bill allowed any biological bloke intact, rocking the full meat and two veg, to decide from 1 minute to the next that actually he's a girl. No medical checks, no diagnosis, just a few months and you're a lady. This policy was met with uproar as Scotland's female-only spaces and Scottish women's hard-won sex-based rights looked to have been sacrificed at the altar of wokeism. Rishi Sunak's brave decision to block this crazy new law by not recognising it in England and Wales ultimately derailed Sturgeon's policy and, consequently, her premiership. So there you go. Nicola Sturgeon tried to cancel women, and in doing so, she cancelled herself. Now, the investigation into Sturgeon's financial dealings is ongoing, and I shouldn't seek to prejudge the police's work at this stage. But it begs the question, if she does wind up in jail, will her cellmate have a penis? That's a whopper. Well, we have a statement from Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister. And she said, "To find myself in the situation I did today, when I'm certain I've committed no offence, is both a shock and deeply distressing. I know beyond doubt that I am, in fact, innocent of any wrongdoing. I will take a day or two to process this latest development. I intend to be back in Parliament soon, where I will continue to represent my Glasgow South Side constituents to the very best of my ability." Your reaction to the arrest of Nicola Sturgeon. Is her dream of independence over? Let me know your thoughts. Mark at gbnews.com. Reacting to my take at 10, journalist and broadcaster Nina Mishkov, adventurer and leadership coach Adrian Hayes, and the leader of UKIP, former Tory MP Neil Hamilton. Well, Nina Mishkov, where do we start with this one? What was your reaction when that headline broke on the newswires earlier today?
Well, it is a shock, isn't it? I mean, you know, it's one of those situations where you think, my God, you know, where will this lead? I have to take issue with you on one thing in your statement about Nicola. She did not respond to the pandemic on a daily basis to embarrass Boris Johnson. I think that's one of the things she did best, in fact. As a leader, she led from the front. She stood on her hind legs every single day and talked to the Scottish people about what the situation was on a day-to-day basis. She led them, and whether she made mistakes or not, or what's happened subsequently, she did that, and you can only commend her for it. And Boris was embarrassed by that because he was constantly having to catch up with her. You also ask about, is this the end of the SNP? Well, you know, it's a terrible mess. It's a total catastrophe. But I saw John Curtis, the renowned pollster, on telly earlier this evening, and he said that, in fact, the polls have not shifted in the Scottish people's support of the SNP. So make what you will of that. And the thing is, we sit here in London on the sofa, not a couch, as one of your viewers named it earlier today. This is a sofa. A couch is a very naff word. We sit here on this sofa and we pontificate from London, from England. Well, frankly, it's down to the Scots to decide what they want. It's not England's business to say you should or you shouldn't do. It's in the same way Europe had no say in whether the UK broke away from the European Union. So why should the UK have a say over whether Scotland breaks away?
Because it's part of our country.
Neil Hamilton, your response to what Nina Mishkov has just said there?
Well, of course, the rest of the UK should have a voice in the debate about Scottish independence, because Scotland is part of the UK. And
UK was part of Europe.
Well, not in the same way. We're a nation. Europe is not a nation. Europe was a bureaucratic construct. But
still, we were able to break free.
The two cases are completely different. But I don't think this is the end of the SNP. It's certainly not the end of the Scottish independence movement. Although I think reality is bound to supervene eventually, because the whole of the SNP's case for Scottish independence was founded upon North Sea oil being the great money tree that would pay for everything. And of course that is now not going to be available because the SNP, the Labour Party, even Conservative government want to stop further development of oil prospecting in the North Sea. So ultimately, you know, Scotland is going to be a very poor country relative to what it could have been.
Greg, can you send in a floor banner just so we can get Neil Hamilton looking in the correct direction? I'd appreciate that. Adrian Hayes, let me ask you what you think now in terms of the future of the SNP. What's going to happen?
Well, actually, I agree with Nina. As a Scot, if they want independence, that's up to them.
To look at the camera.
We've only got the one camera.
We've got the one camera. I think I'm looking at the right camera anyway. So, look, I'm all just as the Catalans. Are we back on? Okay.
Yes, Adrian, you're back.
Thank you. So, if the Catalans want independence, anyway, I'm all for self-determination. It's a UN charter. However, I will say something, and I said it earlier when we talked about Boris Johnson. Leaders promise a better future, and I think Nicola Sturgeon also had that promise. She is a gifted communicator. She speaks very well, and she promised a better future for Scotland. But has she delivered it? Because leaders also have to deliver a better future. And I would argue, as you said in your monologue, is Scotland in a better place now in 8 years of SNP rule? I would argue that it isn't, because of all the things that you mentioned, Neil, and Mark, rather. And I think this obsession on net zero and this obsession on progressive ideology has been her downfall, the SNP's downfall. And I think it's a warning to Western governments. If we go so internally obsessed with this progressive ideology, it will lead to the downfall of all governments in Western nations.
Fascinating stuff. More from my panel with the papers at 10:30 sharp. And we'll be asking, should the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? And we'll be talking to tonight's newsmaker, Anne Widdecombe. She's next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Now, we'll get to more of your emails shortly. A big reaction to so many of our debates tonight, but it's time now for the Newsmaker, in which we speak to a fearless commentator on the big stories of the day. And tonight, what's next for Boris Johnson? As rumours swell about the possibility of a sensational breakaway project, would the public vote for a new centre-right party led potentially by Boris Johnson and supported by none other than Nigel Farage. This morning on Camilla Tominay's brilliant Sunday morning show on GB News, Nigel invited Boris to join forces. Here's what he had to say.
The good side of Boris, of course, is, well, just look at today's newspapers.
Yes.
He's very good at dominating news.
Yeah.
He does have personality. He does make people smile. And if he wants to defend his Brexit legacy,
Yeah.
well, I want to defend my Brexit legacy too. So would there be a possibility of a new coming together on the centre-right? It'd be Boris Johnson. There'd be other MPs that would join in with this as well.
Have you discussed this with Boris Johnson?
Not with him directly, no. But I have discussed it with people very close to him.
Well, let's get the views of tonight's newsmaker, former government minister, best-selling author and television personality Anne Widdecombe. What do you think, Anne? Boris and Farage, the dream team?
Jolly good idea, though I don't necessarily think that it should be Farage second to Boris. What about Boris second to Farage? Don't know. But yes, I mean, on a more serious note, I do think it's a very good idea. There is now a very large splintering of the centre-right. We've got some who are sticking with the Tories in Parliament but don't like any of it. We've got parties like Reclaim and Heritage and all the rest of it. We've got the big one, which is Reform. And I think it would be a very, very good idea. The Conservatives need challenging. They've lost their way. They've become a high-tax, high-spend party. There's very little difference between them and Labour. And I think they need a big challenge, and there would be nothing like that challenge as a formation of another party which was credible and had big people in it.
If that were to happen, Anne, I'm pretty sure that Reform UK, who you're supporting, would be part of that picture. They would collaborate, surely.
Or indeed, the new party would collaborate with Reform. I mean, I think it's Reform that's led the way and is, of course, based on what was first called the Brexit Party, which delivered Boris that majority. He was never grateful for it. He never gave us any credit for it, but we delivered him that huge majority. And I think that we could do a very great deal. We're going to contest every single seat in the next general election. That's very significant. We didn't do that as the Brexit Party. We're going to do it next time. I think that's significant. This is people's chance now. Do you want a new sort of politics in Britain?
Anne Widdecombe, Rishi Sunak is presiding over a party at war. Can he ride out the current storm?
Oh, I mean, they would be fools. I've said this before on your programme. They would be fools to get rid of Sunak because going through yet another leadership challenge won't convince anybody. Won't convince anybody at all, and will be a massive distraction from the real agenda while they actually have the election. So, yes, I think he personally will last until the next general election. I also think he should last until the next general election. But frankly, I see no possibility of him winning it. He is a steady hand on the tiller, but he has no idea where that ship is going. He has no vision. He is selling no vision at all to the British people. It's all, well, I can manage the accounts.
Your reaction to Labour's decision to do a U-turn on their green energy project, £28 billion a year. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has said, we're not going to do it. It's unaffordable. Does this tell us that Labour are serious about government?
No, I think what it tells us is that they don't know what they're doing from one day to the next. Now, all the considerations that she will have taken into account in reversing the policy, and I couldn't believe you give it credit for it, all the considerations that she would have taken into account in reversing the policy will have been considerations that were on the table and should have been known and should have been taken into account when they formed the policy. What they're doing is policy on the hoof as they think is appealing, and then suddenly they realise, oops, can't afford that. Well, that's no way to run a country. You can run an opposition like that, but you can't run a country like that.
Do you think that Boris Johnson will now deliver a scorched earth policy to Rishi Sunak? Do you think that it's actually an issue for the Prime Minister in terms of what Boris does next?
Yes, I think it will be. Now, there is a possibility, of course, that he won't do what we all expect him to do, and he won't challenge Sunak from outside Parliament, and that he'll go away and continue earning big money and all the rest of it, and then later come back. There is that possibility. Somehow it's not terribly in character for Boris, who is a man of the moment. You know, he speaks as he feels at the moment. And so I suspect, yes, he is he almost certainly will prove a problem. And if he weren't going to do that, if he were just going to disappear over the blue horizon, you wouldn't have had Nadine and Nigel following him out. This is a statement about the future, if you like.
Anne Widdecombe, Nicola Sturgeon arrested earlier today, released without charge. We will allow the police to continue their investigation. We won't prejudge it, but the optics aren't great. Do you think the cause of independence has been set back by a generation?
I certainly think it's been set back, whether it's been set back by a generation or for a very long time or forever. I couldn't possibly say. I think it has been set back, but I think also indirectly this is going to have an adverse impact on Rishi Sunak, because the only beneficiaries from a collapsing SNP in Scotland will be Labour.
Yeah.
And therefore, they'll pick up seats in Scotland. That will help them to win the majority at the next general election. So it's actually, if the SNP declines, perversely, that is bad news for Rishi Sunak, even though every single Conservative would like to see them decline.
Well, yes, and that's the point about the collapse of the SNP, or at least their current travails. That's the point about the Tory civil war. There's only one winner, and it is Sir Keir.
Yes, it is. But you see, we bought into this argument at the last general election, and everybody said, oh, don't stand, against Conservatives because we'll end up with Jeremy Corbyn, which was a terrifying prospect. And we bought into that. And the net result was that we didn't actually get Brexit. We got Brexit in name only. We got a huge betrayal of Northern Ireland. We have high taxes. We have none of the things that we were actually promised. And in the interests of which we stood down our candidates, that is the Brexit Party candidates last time. We won't make that mistake again, Mark. We won't buy into that one again.
And how do you think Friday's drama with Boris's announcement that he's stepping down as an MP will impact the result of the next election? Could it be a decisive moment, or had the Tories lost it already?
As I've said numerous times to you, Mark, the Tories have lost this, and they show no sign whatever of regaining any initiative, largely because Rishi doesn't have a vision. And he certainly doesn't have charisma. He has mere competence. In this situation, that's not enough. In some situations, it is. But in this situation, that is not enough. There is a continuing fault line in the Tory party between those who resent Brexit and want some sort of realignment with Europe, even if it's not re-entry, and those who want divergence from Europe. And that fault line is still there, and he is coping with that almost every day. And he hasn't got his party under control.
Anne, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you in a week's time on Mark Dolan tonight, the formidable former government minister Anne Widdecombe. Now, coming up, we've been asking, should Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? Would you vote for it? We will bring you the reaction to our Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll on that one. Plus, we've got the papers with full pundit reaction. All of that is next.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely
Right.
stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. It's time now for the papers. And I'm delighted to say that first we will bring you the results of our People's Poll on Mark Dolan tonight. A fascinating debate we've been having. We asked, should Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage join forces to start a new political party? 68% have said yes, 32% said no. That looks to me like a majority. OK, folks, it's time now for this. Yes, indeed, tomorrow's papers, hot off the press. We start with The Guardian, and let's see what they're splashing with. Senior Tories tell Johnson to shut up and go away. Sturgeon questioned for 7 hours after arrest. I mean, that's an astonishing spectacle, isn't it? Former First Minister of Scotland, detained by police, quizzed for the best part of a day. She has been released without charge, but the investigation is ongoing. Ofsted overhaul fails to change school gradings is another story in The Guardian. Now, let's have a look at the Mail newspaper. Suella, Keir's in the pocket of the eco mob. Home Secretary blasts Labour's plans to thwart law to stop road-blocking fanatics. The Home Secretary wants to give police greater powers to tackle selfish road-blocking stunts that will bring cities to a standstill and lead to clashes with fed-up motorists. Writing in the Mail newspaper, Mrs Braverman revealed that Just Stop Oil's current campaign of 124 slow walks has taken up 12,500 police officer shifts, preventing them from catching serious criminals. Shocking stuff. Also, Camilla's literary flair. The Queen there, dressed very elegantly in blue, in a trouser suit. Also in the Mail, as Nicola Sturgeon is arrested, Scotland's turmoil makes a banana republic look boring, says one of their columnists. Express now. We'll move on to the I newspaper. End of an era in UK politics. Sturgeon arrested, Johnson out in cold. It's remarkable how these two stories have dovetailed. Metro, Brits in Hull's boat inferno. Tragic story, 12 UK tourists rescued, 3 missing after fire engulfs a ship during a Red Sea diving tour. Absolutely tragic stuff. Financial Times. Scotland's ex-leader Sturgeon arrested, then released as part of Finance's probe. And the Daily Star. Now, woman who found Richard III says Henry VIII is buried under tarmac. Another king in a car park. Now, there you go. Thank you. Those are your front pages. Let's get full reaction now from my top pundits, journalist and broadcaster Nina Mishkov, adventurer and leadership coach Adrian Hayes, and the leader of UKIP, former Tory MP Neil Hamilton. OK, folks, it's clearly all about Nicola Sturgeon in tomorrow's papers. Sturgeon arrested in SNP fraud probe, say The Express, which is, we're just getting the artwork to that organised as we speak. Scotland's ex-leader Sturgeon arrested, then released as part of Finance's probe. And here's the thing, Neil Hamilton. Whether or not Nicola Sturgeon is found to have acted illegally, the damage is done. The optics of this are terrible.
Well, it's certainly true. But, of course, she's yesterday's woman in Scotland. And there's no question of her coming back, unlike Boris in England, or indeed the United Kingdom, for that matter. So how much damage this will ultimately do to the SNP is another matter. I think Hamza Useless has probably done more damage than the headlines today, just by being the First Minister. The movement for independence in Scotland clearly now does have significant support. Not a majority. I don't believe that it ever will get a majority in my lifetime, at any rate. I know it isn't very long, but in the foreseeable future. But nevertheless, there's a lot of feeling in Scotland that they are an independent nation, and a nation is a nation when it feels itself to be a nation. This is not something which you can rationalise or measure in terms of pounds, shillings and pence. But I do think that the SNP as a governing party certainly has suffered a lot of damage, not just because of this, because of all the failures you've already set out earlier on in the programme, the failures on the health service, all the woke gender identity nonsense that Sturgeon adopted with such vigour. But it was supported by the Labour Party, supported by a lot of Tory MSPs in Scotland as well. So this isn't something which the SNP is responsible for alone. But I think the economics of it ultimately will capsize the boat.
Although, Nina Mishkov, are we not giving the SNP the last rites a little prematurely, given the fact that at every election they get a landslide victory? There's no reason why they won't again.
I completely agree. That's what I said earlier. You can't write it off because it's a nationhood. It's a feeling. And as I said, John Curtis on tonight said that the polls for SNP support have not shifted. They haven't shifted. Because
it's quite tribal, isn't it?
Well, you could say tribal, in a way, and of course, nationhood, tribe, whatever you like to call it. It's a visceral thing. It's a feeling. Scotland is a very different nation. They care about different things, and also they look to the Westminster Parliament, to the actual mess that the Tories have produced, particularly in the last few years, and they think, why would we want to be ruled by these idiots? These. I mean, in the Guardian,
better idiots of our own.
Exactly. In the Guardian, it says senior Tories tell Johnson to shut up and go away. Wasn't that the phrase that Gavin Williamson, and I refuse to call him sir, is that there's a bunch of all of Boris appointees I would not curtsy to, I can tell you. He as foreign ministers told Russia, told Putin, shut up and go away. I mean, for God's sake, these are the incompetent fools that the Tory party has placed over us and who are in control of us and who have made such an enormous mess. So no wonder the Scottish people look at us and say, we want no part of that. We did not vote for Brexit. They have taken us out of Europe. The Scots did not vote for Brexit. There was a higher percentage. Neither did the Welsh only voted for it because of all the British sort of who'd moved over to Wales. Ireland didn't vote for it. Brexit was voted for by the English. Wasn't voted for by Londoners, and I count myself a Londoner before anything else. It's the English. And the Scots' attitude to the English goes back centuries and hasn't really changed, has not really changed. I'm half Scottish. I was brought up in South Africa. When I came back to Scotland, I was born in Scotland. When I came back to Scotland in the age of 15, I remember my first day at school in a big Scottish comprehensive. I got myself lost. It was a huge school, and I turned up in a classroom late. And, I opened the door, and the Scottish school teacher said to me, "Who are you?" And I said, I'm terribly sorry, I'm late, it's my first day. And she said, "Oh, don't you think you can be here with your fancy English accent?"
Right, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
A pretty tough reception.
Good
accent. Well, there you go. I mean, I just wonder, I wonder how this is going to play out, Adrian Hayes. Is the union more secure today than it has been in recent years?
Yeah, look, the SNP is in a bit of danger, but as I said, I think and I agree that, Nina, the dream of independence will still live. Just as a view on the papers, though, Mark, I'm actually surprised that Johnson isn't dominating it so much. Yep. There's quite a few different stories. Sturgeon's in there. I mean, the Eye saying end of an era in UK politics. Sturgeon arrested Johnson out in the cold. So, you know, maybe the sort of writing's on the wall for both of them. Maybe they're not the big names that they used to be. But I'm sure that there's a calm before the storm, because Boris will come back with a big announcement.
Yes,
soon.
Neil, is there a changing of guards, whether it's Sturgeon or Trump in America, perhaps, and of course, Boris in England? Senior Tories, say The Guardian, Neil, tell Johnson to shut up and go away. The imagined coup that he was going to perform hasn't quite happened, has it, with a flurry of MPs standing down with immediate effects?
No, well, we don't know to what extent the spin in advance of today had any substance behind it anyway. It always seemed very unlikely to me that there was going to be a lot of MPs like turkeys voting for Christmas, even though most of them must know that come Christmas after next, by the latest, they will all be strung up and ready for the plucking. But you know, this is, in a sense, a kind of Westminster bubble story, because I mean, the Tories are heading for the iceberg, and I can't see any way in which there can be any meaningful recovery between now and the next election. There simply isn't time.
Is the departure of Boris Johnson an opportunity for Rishi Sunak, though?
Well, I mean, Rishi Sunak is a pointless managerial technocrat, as Anne Widdecombe said, with no vision that he can articulate to provide any reason that ordinary people can understand why they should vote Tory.
Well, he wants to halve inflation. He wants to halve inflation. He wants to shrink the NHS waiting list. He wants to boost the economy.
You could do 3, but why 5?
He wants to cut the debts, and
they're responsible for creating all the problems in the first place.
Exactly.
So it's not a great convincing pitch that I'm going to solve all the problems that I've created. I'm not suggesting the Labour Party would have been any better. I think they would have been worse, because they would have locked us down harder and longer and created even bigger financial problems for us to cope with after the COVID pandemic. And that's fundamentally what's at the heart of the economic crisis that is now imposing so many burdens upon ordinary people in their daily lives. But the Tories have done nothing about immigration over the last 13 years, and now the latest net migration figures are the highest ever. And the green nonsense we were talking about earlier on, the Tories are even more overboard about that than the Labour Party in many ways.
But the trouble with the Tories, it's all infighting, it's all political, it's
and Labour don't fight?
That's the nature of politics.
I mean, Starmer out is trending every other day on Twitter.
No, but the point being, what is Boris Johnson's resignation, or Nadine Dorris's resignation, or the whole story about honours? What has that got to do with serving your constituents? Let's not forget what an MP is.
You know,
no. Basically, when did Boris last represent his constituents? When was he last in the Commons actually working? When did he last visit anybody? So they have taken because there's such a toxic bunch of egotists and incompetents and venal fools that they are obsessed with themselves and their position and their power. They've got the snouts in the trough. And so, you know, ordinary people, us, the people, are completely, you know, just done so badly by them.
And where Boris is... Look, trust in politicians has never been so low as it is now. And I think where this does... There is an opportunity for a bit of, we've said it before, realignment in British politics, because I just don't think the old system is working anymore. And I think a lot of us who are politically homeless would actually welcome that. And so if there's breakaway groups here and demise of this or that, I think it could be a positive thing.
OK, well, listen, an amazing headline in the Mail newspaper. Suella Braverman, Sir Keir is in the pocket of the eco-mob. More on that in just a couple of minutes. Is she right? Also, we've got The Sun and the Daily Express, and my pundits will be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros. All of that is next.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway,
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's catch up with your brilliant emails, Mark at gbnews.com. Shirley, very excited about the idea of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson forming a new political party. Nigel and Boris would sort this country out and this mess, says Shirley. They would be an unstoppable combination. I hope they join together. And that is from Shirley. Regarding the SNP, Jim says, Mark, the silent majority of Scots think the SNP are inept, incompetent and corrupt. A damning verdict. David Bell says, Dear Mark, let me reference your pundit Nina Mishkov. I'm Scottish and British. The UK is an incorporated union. The EU is a club. All British citizens have a right to a say in destroying the union. There is no Scotland. There is no England. The King is head of the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for that. Keep those emails coming, Mark at gbnews.com. Let's have a look at tomorrow's papers now. And we've got the Express. They lead with... let's have a look. Let's grab that front page. Bear with me whilst I gather it. Oh, there it is. Sturgeon arrested in SNP fraud probe. Also, sizzle to drizzle as storms roll in. I think we could do with the temperatures coming down a little bit. 3 Britons missing after Egyptian boat fire. And Rishi urged, prove your true blue as a Tory to end the war, with a smiling photograph of Boris Johnson out for his morning run. The Sun newspaper. City that never sleeps. More celebrations for Man City, who are the champions of Europe. 3 Brits missing in blaze on boat. And cops probe SNP funds. Nicked Sturgeon's 7-hour quiz, say the Sun newspaper. Now, listen, let's get back to my brilliant pundits, Nina Mishkov, Adrian Hayes and Neil Hamilton. And let's get their views on this fascinating story in the Mail newspaper. And it's a piece, an exclusive by Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. And she has said she said tonight, actually, that Sir Keir Starmer has has the eco mob, basically they are controlling his policies. Keir is in the pocket of the eco mob. The Home Secretary wants to give police greater powers to tackle selfish road-blocking stunts that bring cities to a standstill and lead to clashes with fed-up motorists. Writing in the Mail, Mrs Braverman revealed that Just Stop Oil's current campaign of 124 slow walks has taken up 12,500 police officer shifts, preventing them from catching proper criminals. So there you have it, Neil Hamilton. Keir Starmer in the pocket of the eco-mob. Your reaction?
Well, of course he is, but the whole government is in the hands of the eco-mob because their policy is along the lines of what these people want. I think the answer to this is perhaps withdraw the police from these situations and let White Van Man sort out the issue. As we've seen increasing frustration boiling over, where ordinary people want to go about their business, getting to work, getting to hospitals or whatever, are being prevented from going about their lawful daily business by a collection of super privileged youngsters who know nothing about life and who we are funding through the tax system, or they've got rich middle class or upper class parents who will provide them with the wherewithal to have.
It's a bit of a sweeping generalisation. You can't know who all these protesters are. You can't.
Well, they've definitely got enough time on their hands to glue themselves to the M25, haven't they?
Now, the thing is, what's more interesting is why Suella Braverman is tackling this situation. She could have done this article at any time in the last 6 months. She is deflecting attention from the fact that she runs a department, the Home Office, which is entirely unfit for purpose. There are far greater problems that she should be dealing with and she isn't dealing with, and she is utterly
incompetent. People gluing themselves to the M25 is a problem.
It is a problem, but there are greater problems. We're talking.
Do you think this is a distraction, a smokescreen?
It's a complete distraction. Don't look at the big problems here. Look at this, look at this, look at this.
Mark, I think there's a political side of this. I don't think this is the problem. The issue is the police, and I was having a good chat with Harry Miller of Fair Cop outside. The police have got, as I understand it, the powers already exist to clear these protesters off the road, but they haven't. They've done the softly, the woke, progressive, arresting and pushing White Van Man who's also clear these protesters off the streets. So it's, again, and it's a legacy of the Conservatives of the last 12, 13 years. They have failed to get the police back onto tackling criminals and fighting crime. Instead, you've got the Royal College of Policing, which is pushing this progressive ideology, this woke agenda, and it's not working. So I think it's a political point Suella's making here, which I don't think is perhaps needed. We just need police to get back to doing what they're meant to be doing.
Well, yes, I mean...
They dumped the police. Now then they said, no, we're getting far more police, and then they brought in people who should never be near a police uniform and have any kind of power, particularly over women. And now they're kind of reaping the rewards of all of that. So they've really screwed it up. But Suella needs to get a grip with her department.
Well, of course, we know that, and she's no doubt trying to do this. But you can't turn around an entire department like the Home Office overnight. The whole culture of the civil service, particularly the senior civil service, is antipathetic to everything that Suella Braverman wants to do. The whole political establishment of this country has betrayed the interests of ordinary people over the last generation or more. The whole Brexit spontaneous uprising was about this difference between the attitudes of the metropolitan liberal middle class public sector taxpayer funded people on the one hand, and ordinary people who want to go about their daily business unmolested and to live in an independent country whose government they can elect and dismiss if they don't like it. That's fundamentally against everything that these people
Nobody
want
likes
to
this
achieve.
government, and we haven't been able to dismiss them yet, and maybe 18 months before we get a chance.
We have elections on a regular basis.
Well, yes, but not regular enough in this case.
OK, fascinating debate, which will no doubt continue. I'm delighted to say we've got the Mirror and the Times now. Let's start with, I think, the Mirror. And a very, very tragic headline. 3 Brits missing in boat blaze, and City are out on the town. Man City celebrating being champions of Europe. Now, how about this in the Times newspaper? Sturgeon questioned for 7 hours after arrest. More detail from Kieran Andrews, their Scottish political editor at the Times. Nicola Sturgeon said she was shocked and deeply distressed after being arrested and questioned for 7 hours by police investigating the SNP's finances. Sturgeon's arrest threw the SNP into further turmoil. Labour is increasingly confident that the scandal will cause the Nationalists to lose seats in Scotland and could be pivotal in helping Keir Starmer get into number 10. There were mounting calls for Sturgeon to be suspended from the party that she led just 11 weeks ago, pending the outcome of this investigation. One of the interesting aspects of this story is not just the missing 600 grand of donations that were going towards an independence campaign. We don't know where that money is. Or what about the £100,000 motorhome found at the residential address of her husband's mother, who's in her 90s. The plot thickens. But do you know what the real scandal is, Adrian Hayes? 100 grand for a motorhome. Yeah, who's got that money?
Wonder where more expensive than most houses in
That is an expensive caravan, let me tell you. Let's now ask my brilliant pundit's choice of headline hero and back page zero. So, Nina, who's caught your eye? Who's your hero tonight?
My hero is Prince Harry this week because he's taken on, it's very brave, he has taken on...
Has the heat got to you?
No, absolutely not. He has taken on the tabloid newspapers, and good on him. I thought it was fantastically brave for him to put himself in that position.
Took on the papers with no evidence, just a bunch of feelings and emotions.
There is plenty of evidence.
It was all wasn't it?
No, over...
Blah, blah, blah.
No, over many, many hours. Of course, there are things where you say you don't know, you can't prove absolutely. For instance, Jane Kerr, the royal writer who took the stand afterward, who was from the Mirror, she has admitted that she had commissioned 900 instances of private investigators, but she couldn't actually remember writing particular things, or she couldn't remember exactly. I mean, I was on the sofa with Dan Wooten the other night, and Lady Victoria Harvey was next to me. She said that she'd been hacked, but she didn't know it until the police had contacted her. Now, you don't know how it's done, but there are so many... There are so many bits of evidence.
If there's hacking, that's illegal and it shouldn't happen, of course. But apparently he had his phone hacked 2 years before he owned a phone. What is he, Doctor Who?
That's not true.
Michael J. Fox in Back to the Future. Adrian, briefly, if you can, your headline hero.
Very quickly, I'm going to turn away from politics. Let's go to sporting. We've had two sporting icons have achieved huge success this weekend. Pep Guardiola, who has got to be one of the greatest managers in the Premier League, and also Novak Djokovic, a record 23rd Grand Slam against all the odds and all the problems he's had the last few years.
Correct. And how he survived COVID without being vaccinated, I'll never know. Neil, couple of seconds. Who's your hero?
I'm going to go for Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was very appropriately honoured in the honours list, except it should have been a baronetcy, of course, which is hereditary. Because he points to a more gracious age, before the reform of 1832.
Brilliant stuff. Well deserved. Nina, just the name, please. Your back page zero.
British American Tobacco, who produce vapes that are ruining our children's lungs.
Shocking stuff. Well said. Couldn't agree more. Adrian, who have you got in one sentence, if you can?
Bill Gates, the unelected megalomaniac who has got his billions into all sorts of areas of our world.
Yes, that's right. Obese health guru Bill Gates. Neil, couple of seconds.
The House of Commons Privileges Committee, a bunch of hypocritical non-entities.
There you go. Well, listen, you're not an non-entity, neither are my brilliant pundits. Thanks for your company tonight. Loved having three very busy shows. We're back on Friday at 8. Headliners is next.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's